Montag lieben, glauben, globen.
Quentin Tarantino's film Pulp Fiction, released in 1994, is widely regarded as one of the most influential movies of the 90s. Known for its nonlinear storytelling, sharp dialogue, dark humor, pop culture references, and intertwining tales of violence and redemption in Los Angeles. In it, we are introduced to the character of Vincent Vega, a hitman for an organized crime outfit. Vincent is the most prominent character in the film. He is heavily featured in 3 of the film's 7 sequences, and is a supporting character in the rest, taking a small but important part in Butch's part of the story. On first viewing, or to the casual observer, probably the most common word to come to mind when describing Vincent is cool. Both he and Jules are sharply dressed in matching black suits and ties, which exude an air of professionalism, authority, and organization. For most of the film, he has a very calm and collected demeanor. When he speaks, it's soft and smooth. He uses hip slang.
No, baby, you dig it the most.
And has a good sense of humor.
Would you give a guy a foot massage?
And he is, of course, a great dancer, giving us perhaps one of the greatest dance scenes of all time with the dance contest at Jackrabbit Slim's. After all, Vincent is brilliantly portrayed by John Travolta, who knows a thing or two about dancing. However, upon deeper inspection and multiple viewings, and examining the majority of Vincent's words and actions, the truth is revealed. Vincent Vega is a moron. In multiple scenes, Vincent makes it clear to us, the audience, as well as other characters in the film, the extent of his stupidity. In this video, we're going to analyze Vincent Vega with a focus on his incompetence and how it factors into his words, choices, and interactions with other characters. We'll show that his dumbness is multifaceted and is wide-ranging, from social skills to personality, technical expertise, professionality, and even basic common sense. However, before tearing Vincent apart, we're first going to take a brief look at the topics we can safely acknowledge that Vincent is actually proficient in, or educated about. We'll call it In Defencent of Vincent, things Vincent actually knows. First off, movies, specifically classic films. When Vincent and Mia go to Jackrabbit Slim's, Vincent quips,
Maybe we should have sat in Marilyn Monroe section.
Mia remarks,
Which one? There's 2 Monroe.
Vincent shows a surprising level of discernment by noting,
That is Marilyn Monroe. That is Mamie Van Doren, and I don't see Jenny Mansfield. She must have a night off or something.
You're pretty smart.
Yeah, I got my moments.
Later in the movie, we can assume that Vincent is a big fan of classic films since he appears to catch Winston Wolfe's jab about Lash LaRue.
How about you, Lash LaRue? Can you keep your spurs from jingling and jangling?
He also has the one-off line before meeting Mia that implies he also keeps up with modern movies.
She used to be an actress.
Oh, really? Did she do anything out of scene?
Second, food.
Yeah, I'd go for some breakfast. Feel like having breakfast with me?
When we first meet Vincent, he's actually dispensing knowledge. First about drugs, which we'll get to in a moment, then food. Food will be a common theme for Vincent throughout the film. Vincent shares the valuable cultural insights he observed while spending multiple years in Europe.
They got the metric system. They wouldn't know what the fuck a quarter pounder is.
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
He low-key implies a dislike for Burger King,
What do they call it? Whopper.
I don't know. I didn't go on a Burger King.
showing that he does have something of a discerning palate and isn't just a fan of random fast food.
You know what they put on French fries in Holland instead of ketchup?
What?
Mayonnaise.
In fact, Jules, aware of Vincent's depth of burger knowledge, will defer to Vincent as the resident burger expert later that morning when they meet with Brett.
Vincent, you ever had a Big Kahuna burger?
Upon arriving at Jackrabbit Slim's, an establishment heretofore unknown to him, he becomes dubious and suggests they go get something he's more familiar with.
Come on, man. Let's go get a steak.
To his credit, he orders his steak rare, showing a baseline knowledge for what makes a good steak.
How do you want that cooked? Burnt to a crisp or bloody as hell?
Bloody as hell, and oh yeah, look at this. Vanilla Coke.
He also proclaims the glory of bacon, which is also correct.
Yeah, but bacon tastes good. Pork chops taste good.
He also shows a genuine appreciation for the $5 milkshake.
God damn, it's a pretty fucking good milkshake.
And last, but certainly not least, to Vincent anyway, drugs. Drugs are Vincent's specialty. His first lines of dialogue in the film are related to Holland's drug laws.
I mean, they want you to smoke in your home or certain designated places.
Vincent is well acquainted with all the aspects of the law that pertain to him and his profession. At Lance's house, before meeting Mia, we have it from the horse's mouth himself.
Remember, I just got back from Amsterdam.
Vincent is low-key letting Lance know he is very experienced when it comes to heroin, and implying he will be hard to impress. This is supported by his eagerness to go ahead and get high before driving to meet Mia. That's not to say Vincent makes good life choices. He doesn't, both evidenced in the movie and what will be highlighted here. That's the point of the video. That's just to say it supports the premise that he is a genuine heroin connoisseur and we can accept Vincent telling the truth in this context. In other words, he's not lying about being able to discern good heroin from great heroin. So, to summarize, Vincent knows about movies, food, and drugs. Therefore, it wouldn't be fair to label him a complete or absolute moron. However, there is substantial evidence that suggests Vincent is at least a moderate to severe moron, as well as being subjectively a bad person, by multiple standards. That's the main focus of our video, so let's get into it now. Chapter 1. Vincent is a shitty hitman. Vincent is supposed to be a professional hitman, and you would expect someone that makes that their profession to make smart, meticulous, and careful choices. However, we consistently see Vincent behaving to the contrary. There are two settings where we witness Vincent working as a hitman, at Brett's apartment and later at Butch's apartment. When he and Jules are getting their guns out of the trunk, Jules makes a comment that they should have more firepower, considering they stand to be significantly outnumbered.
We should have shotguns with this kind of deal.
Vincent repeats this.
We should have fucking shotguns.
He's not being helpful or adding to the conversation, just wasting oxygen, so to speak. This is characteristic for Vincent, and we'll see him exhibit this trait repeatedly throughout the film. But we're just getting started. Once they walk into Brett's apartment, neither Vincent nor James bother to check the bathroom for additional guys. Vincent will later try to lay the blame on Marvin for this, while taking no responsibility himself. I suppose it would be fair to lay at least partial blame on Jules for this shortcoming. However, in his defense, Jules has been the one doing the talking during the meeting, so presumably and logically, it should be Vincent to be on Overwatch, so to speak. Instead, he casually lights up a cigarette and waits for Jules to call the shots. This is consistent with his character. Smoking looks cool, but is probably not the most prudent move to make in a tense situation where a gunfight is a very real possibility. This is followed closely by a scene that will highlight another negative personality trait, and that's Vincent's low attention span or just general lack of awareness, not something you want in a professional hitman. After opening the briefcase, Jules has to call out to him twice, and it still takes a beat before Vincent comes back to reality.
We happy? Vincent! We happy?
Like a child, he is completely distracted by whatever is inside. Jules can't hide his annoyance. Another thing showcasing Vince's just general lack of readiness, Jules fires off 2 shots about a minute apart. You would think that Vincent would get his gun out, or at least have his hand in his jacket ready to pull his own gun, should something unexpected happen, like a guy jumping out of the bathroom that you didn't check, but we'll get to this in a moment. No, he just keeps smoking and stands there with his hand in his pocket, enjoying Jules doing his thing. And it's not until Jules starts quoting scripture that Vincent bothers to get his own pistol out, suggesting he is either seen firsthand or has heard before that this is Jules' finishing move. Finally, when it comes time to execute Brett, the angle from which Vincent is firing from unnecessarily puts Marvin in danger. From what I can tell from the room, if Brett is at the center and Jules is at 12 o'clock and Marvin is about 1 o'clock and Vincent is behind Brett at about 7 or 8 o'clock, and for what it's worth, Roger, who is dead on the couch, is at 9 o'clock, this puts Marvin almost directly across from Vincent. Now, it's essentially point blank range and a downward angle. If you're Marvin, this is probably still way too close for comfort, especially when Vincent could have easily repositioned himself to several other spots in the room that would not be putting Marvin in the line of fire. Moving forward, after the unknown fourth man pops out of the bathroom, misses all 6 shots, and is subsequently dealt with, Vincent says,
"Chill, Jules, this shit happens."
Wrong. Wrong.
We've already talked about Vincent's blatant lack of preparation and failing to check the bathroom beforehand, but I thought this line by Vincent was insightful and supports the contention that he is an idiot generally and a shitty hitman specifically. This kind of shit might happen to Vincent because he's a shitty hitman, but Jules is rightly freaked out. The last part of Jules and Vincent's mission is to escort Marvin back to Marcellus, and it's here that we witness what is probably the biggest piece of evidence that Vincent is a bad hitman. He and Jules are discussing what happened back at the apartment when Vincent turns around in his seat to ask Marvin his opinion on the situation. And we all know what happens next. Let's take a look again at the moment just before. Vincent is holding a loaded gun, charged, with the safety off, pointed at Marvin's head, with his finger on the trigger. Keep in mind, Vincent is supposed to be a professional hitman. Put simply, his job is to know when and where to use his tool, which happens to be a gun. The blatant disregard for basic gun safety conjures so many questions. Why is the pistol even on his person at this point? Why is it in his hand? Why is it loaded and charged? Why is his finger on the trigger? Why is he pointing it at Marvin? When they arrived at Brett's apartment initially, they had to get their guns out of the trunk. Why not put them back in the trunk? Maybe they felt like they were in higher danger after leaving Brett's than when they arrived. One thing is for certain, it is definitely not behavior a reasonable person would describe as being a good hitman. Now, last but certainly not least on the list of instances that demonstrate Vincent being a shitty hitman is the one that ultimately spells his doom. After Butch throws the fight, as alluded to earlier, both Vincent and Marcellus, at least according to the bonus content on the collector's edition, go to his apartment to ambush him. They should have the upper hand here. However, Marcellus evidently leaves to go get them some breakfast and leaves his submachine gun on the counter. For what appears to be no reason other than sheer carelessness, Vincent goes to the bathroom again and leaves the weapon on the kitchen counter, which Butch subsequently finds and uses to kill him. If being killed by your own sword makes you a bad knight, then being killed by your own silenced MAC-10 probably makes you a bad hitman. Or in this case, your boss's MAC-10, or whatever. Marcellus, who, unlike Vincent, is actually intelligent and capable, at least as portrayed in other parts of the film. So it seems unlikely he would lay the weapon down and leave while Vincent is in the bathroom, indisposed. So we can surmise that it was Vincent who chose to leave the weapon on the counter when he went to the bathroom, which is par for the course for him. Maybe he's hesitant about leaving Marcellus potentially defenseless and purposefully leaves it there, but again, a bad decision considering Butch could show up at any time, and just a bad decision for someone whose job is essentially security. Besides that, I think that would be giving him too much credit because based on additional evidence, which we'll get to, I'm more ready to believe this is Vincent being foolish instead of courteous. But back to the MAC-10. Once again, it's loaded, charged, the safety is off, all ready to go when Butch finds it. Perhaps ironically, Butch may have squeezed the trigger unintentionally because he flinches or is spooked when the toaster goes off. This could be a foreshadow of similar carelessness represented later when Marvin pays the price for Vincent's ineptness. Now would probably be a good time to remind you that so far, all of this has only been to show you Vincent as a moron through the lens of being a professional hitman. However, Vincent's stupidity is multifaceted. So we'll move on to the next chapter. Chapter 2. Vincent is a stupid jerk. Let's move on from Vincent's technical profession and instead focus on his social intelligence and interpersonal skills, or lack thereof. Indeed, save for a few brief glimmers of benevolent humanity shining through at some points, for the most part, Vincent is a pretentious, tactless, obstinate and morally hypocritical person. Vincent is pretentious. Walking up to Brett's apartment, Jules and Vincent are discussing his upcoming Mia escort mission when he drops this gem.
I don't watch TV.
Jules immediately keys in on the smugness and irrelevance of the statement and basically calls him out on it.
Yeah, but you are aware that there's an invention called television, and on this invention they show shows, right?
Yeah.
In addition to admitting to Jules, he does actually know what Jules is talking about. Vincent's body language suggests that he knows he just ended up sounding stupid when he was trying to sound cool. There's also the scene where he's buying drugs from Lance. Vincent may indeed be an expert when it comes to heroin, but he is certainly not humble about it.
Remember, I just got back from Amsterdam.
Lance immediately claps back that he is an authority on heroin purity. Again, this is Vincent trying to look cool, like he won't be easily impressed by subpar heroin like all the other junkies. Vincent is tactless. Vincent either doesn't care or doesn't know about social norms when it comes to when you should and shouldn't say something. Let's start with two easy examples.
I'm gonna take a piss.
For someone that otherwise seems genuinely interested in being perceived as cool or classy, this is a decidedly unclassy thing to say. In his defense, Vincent is likely somewhat inebriated. He drove, by the way. So maybe he's not at the top of his cool game at that moment. He can't, however, use that as an excuse for our next example. While Jules is having his moment of clarity, Vincent decides to put it on hold in the most crass way possible.
I'm gonna take a shit.
Not only is this probably the crudest way he could say he's going to the bathroom, it shows a disregard for the gravity of the subject matter that Jules was just trying to share with him. Jules is delving into spiritual questions and the meaning of life, while Vincent shows no respect or reverence. This is more likely out of plain ignorance than malice, though he does come off as kind of intolerant and dismissive of Jules' ideas about becoming a nomad.
They got a name for that, Jules. It's called a bum.
Like a truly dumb individual, Vincent doesn't take time to process what he's saying before he says it. A common saying for this would be that he speaks before he thinks. This is evident at the beginning of the discussion about Antoine when Jules and Vincent are waiting for the elevator.
Half black, half Samoan. Used to call him Tony Rocky Howard.
Yeah, maybe fat, right?
Vincent doesn't know what type of relationship Jules has with Antoine. They could be friends, they could be family, but Vincent once again shows a complete lack of tact by using the lowest common denominator to describe him. And considering the way Jules calls him out about this, that it might not be fair to call him fat, and gives Antoine the benefit of the doubt when they're talking about the alleged foot massage later, they may indeed be friends.
I wouldn't go so far as to call the brother fat. I mean, he got a weight problem. What's the nigga gonna do? He's Samoan.
He does basically the same thing at Lance's house.
Which one's true? One with all the shit in her face?
No, that's Jody. That's my wife.
In this context, Vince is making it clear he doesn't find having piercings in your face to be attractive, which by itself is fine, it's a preference, but it's decidedly not a nice or tactful way to bring it up, especially when the person might be your friend's wife. It's really hard to defend Vincent for this. It's like Vincent doesn't bother doing the basic process of elimination in his mind before asking what could potentially be a mildly offensive question. The fact that he has to ask shows he's unaware which of the women is Lance's wife, so perhaps he should approach the topic with a bit of caution. But no, he ends up making the less intelligent decision. Speaking of intelligent decisions, are you enjoying the video so far? If so, please like, share, and subscribe. Anyway, Vincent is hypocritical. In several instances throughout the film, we can find Vincent contradicting his own supposed previously established beliefs. We can trace this back to Vincent being a bad hitman. After the unknown fourth man jumps out, misses his shot, and gets dealt with, Vincent immediately questions Marvin about it, insinuating he purposefully did not alert them to his presence. I think we can surmise that in some sense, Marvin was actually an inside or undercover guy for Marcellus, so maybe it would actually make sense for Marvin to not blow his cover until he absolutely had to. Vincent has no such excuse. In fact, as a professional hitman, he should know better than to make assumptions about security. In fact, this hypocritical lack of bathroom-level situational awareness will come back to haunt Vincent later in a deadly way. This after giving Marvin the third degree regarding hitman bathroom dynamics. When we get back to the bar following the events of the Bonnie incident, we see some tension develop between Vincent and Butch. As far as we know, Butch doesn't know Vincent and is therefore probably genuinely curious why Vincent would be giving him the evil eye or trying to intimidate him. It's possible Vincent has already been informed of the plan to bribe Butch to throw the fight, and so is aware that it may be his job to deal with Butch should the arrangement not go as planned. However, there could be more to it than that. Despite being a hitman, Vincent has a code or some kind of list of what he considers to be morally acceptable. Take, for example, the exchange with Lance where Vincent describes his car being vandalized, and how such an act in his eyes is one of the highest forms of disrespect. Never mind that Vincent gets paid to kill people for a living, and shows no remorse when accidentally blowing off a colleague's head. Back to Butch at the bar. The point is, to Vincent, there are things that are honorable and dishonorable. And if he was aware that Marcellus planned to bribe Butch to throw the fight, perhaps he would develop a disdain for Butch, maybe believing that Butch is selling his soul in a way that Vincent believes he is morally above and is deservable of contempt. After returning to Mia's house following the night out at Jackrabbit Slim's, Vincent has to basically debate and convince himself, literally in the mirror, that he should end the night right now, presumably before anything physical happens. For context, this is after the long conversation and disagreement Vincent had with Jules, where he essentially argued that he could understand why Marcellus would push Antoine out a window for giving Mia a foot massage, while conceding that the punishment was too severe for the crime. And yet here he is, having to talk himself out of staying longer and potentially doing something that he shouldn't do. In his own words,
I mean, that's his fucking wife, man. They think they have no sense of humor about this shit.
Ultimately, he does decide to call it a night, but by then there's already a change of plans. He makes the right decision, but it takes a minute or two, whereas with Jules, he seemed more immediately righteously convicted in his beliefs. He also ruins Jimmy's washcloth.
Hey, fuck, nigga, what the fuck you just doing with the towel, man?
I was drying my hands.
After complaining to Lance about someone destroying his property by keying his car.
Some dickless piece of shit fuck with it.
Note that he makes this complaint about an easily fixable problem while holding a pretty substantial chunk of cash. And what's this?
I don't watch TV. You ever seen that show, Cops?
So not only pretentious, but also full of shit. Vincent is ungracious. In multiple situations where he should be thankful for the help and support he receives, Vincent is instead rude and obstinate. We first see this in the Bonnie situation when Jules and Vincent are cleaning themselves up in Jimmy's bathroom. Jules is letting Vincent know,
we gotta be real fucking delicate with this Jimmy situation.
Keep in mind, everyone, Jules, Vincent, Jimmy, they're all in this situation because of Vincent's incompetence.
If that favor means that I gotta take shit, then he can stick that favor straight up his ass. I don't care.
So preoccupied with being disrespected that he is willing to risk everyone getting busted or worse. For what it's worth, he does manage to hold his tongue while Jimmy is sharing his displeasure with Jules. Unfortunately, that same attitude shows up again when the wolf starts to delegate assignments.
Please would be nice.
Come again?
I said a please would be nice.
Once again, we are gathered here today because of you, Vincent. Perhaps you could be thankful or at least show a little humility and keep your mouth shut? No. It's more important that you maintain a facade of being a cool badass that don't take no shit from nobody, even at the risk of alienating the only person voluntarily there and doing his best to remedy the situation for everybody's sake. Later on, after everything is cleaned up, the wolf even roasts him for trying to be a tough guy.
How about you, Lash LaRue? Can you keep your spurs from jingling and jangling?
One last piece to highlight how, if Vincent can just keep his mouth shut, everything would be better for everyone. At the diner, Jules stays cool and basically has complete control of the situation with Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. In an effort to get them to mutually de-escalate the situation, Jules voluntarily donates the $1,500 in his wallet. Everything is fine. Then, ever helpful, Vincent chimes in with,
Jules, you give that fucking Nimrod $1,500 and I'll shoot him on general principle.
to which Jules politely asks him to be quiet.
Bitch, shut the fuck up!
Just another situation where Vincent is needlessly introducing friction into the system when everything would run smoother if he just literally said nothing. He does it again when he and Lance have the pointless back and forth about getting the little black book.
Get the shot!
Look, I am if you let me.
Hey, someone fucking stop!
Well, stop talking to me. Start talking
Get
to her.
shot! Right!
Note that Vincent calls Lance for help, then gives him shit in the moment for never having given an adrenaline shot before. Now that we've established, at least in my opinion, that Vincent is indeed a bad person, we are free to feel less empathy for him when we go into our next chapter, where we will examine Vincent's intelligence on an even more rudimentary and remedial basis. Chapter 3. Vincent is an idiot. In this final chapter, we'll take a critical look at Vincent's general intelligence and common sense, or lack thereof. First, let's look at self-preservation. Right off the bat, I think it would be fair to say that several of Vincent's driving-related choices can be called into question. Namely, that he shoots up before driving to Mia, then drives them both back home from Jackrabbit Slim's after presumably having a few drinks. Driving impaired with Mia is double jeopardy from a self-preservation perspective. Not only could he get himself injured or killed in an automobile accident, if Mia were injured or killed, then regardless of Vincent's condition, Marcellus would assuredly hold him accountable. This same disregard for self-preservation is put on display when he is eyeballing Butch at the bar.
You looking at something, friend?
He presumably feels safe in this environment to do so, as otherwise it would be a severely bad idea to try to pick a fight with a championship-level boxer. Vincent doesn't know it yet, but Butch will literally beat a guy to death. Then, of course, there's the unnecessary conflict with the wolf that not only highlights Vincent's ungraciousness, but puts multiple people's lives in danger.
I don't mean disrespect, okay? I respect you. I just don't like people barking orders at me, that's all.
Besides blatantly disregarding his own mortality, Vincent tends to be absent-minded. Like we mentioned earlier when we were looking at his skill as a hitman, Jules has to call to him twice before he can get his attention. He also cluelessly walks past the table at Jackrabbit Slim's because he's enamored with the atmosphere of the establishment. Not to mention leaving the MAC-10 on Butch's counter, but we already went over that. When they're first getting cleaned up at Jimmy's during the Bonnie incident, Vincent inconsiderately ruins Jimmy's washcloth, for which he is soundly rebuked by Jules, who is growing increasingly impatient with Vincent's less virtuous personality traits.
Maybe if you had lava, I could have done a better job.
I used the same fucking soap you did, and when I finished the towel, it didn't look like no goddamn maxi pad.
Finally, if we're going to take Vincent's general common sense into question, then we can't ignore this scene.
You gotta bring the needle down in a stabbing motion.
I gotta stab her 3 times?
No, you don't gotta fucking stab her 3 times.
I think it would be fair to say most people understand the mechanics of a shot. Nobody has ever had an experience where you received a shot and the doctor stabbed you 3 times in the same spot with the same needle. And this is particularly dumb for Vincent. As a self-proclaimed expert heroin user, you would think he would be familiar with the concept of administering chemicals via syringe. Conclusion. I think Vincent is dumb and bad, based on the vast majority of his words and actions that we have access to. To be fair, there are scenes where he comes across as congenial, romantic, and funny. These scenes are few and far between, but I'm glad they're there because without them, Vincent as a character would be almost unbelievable, one-dimensional, coming across like an inept clown in an otherwise dark, gritty, and realistic type of story. So is Vincent a suave gun for hire that is simply a victim of circumstance and bad luck? Or is he a dumbass, someone so incompetent he's a danger to himself and those around him? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.